Dive radio transcript, copied from dryland evidence storage. The missing diver's radio calls at 0317, but the signal source is dry land. The first problem is not what it says. The first problem is where the record says it came from. This is a Bureau of Lost Signals case file. Original fiction, reconstructed like an archive recording. The case is called "The Missing Diver Kept Calling from Dry Land." At the center is a missing diver, a dryland dive radio, and gear that records an underwater event indoors. No gore, no easy monster. Just timestamps, witness notes, and one mistake the file keeps making on purpose. It should be explainable. Not yet. The first version sounds like damaged equipment. The second sounds like coincidence. The third sounds like it knows who is listening. The file does not begin with a monster. It begins with a salt-stained dive radio beside a dry wetsuit, ordinary enough to be ignored until the timestamps start contradicting the room. The search coordinator says the storage room smelled like low tide before the first call came through. Then the pattern changes. The detail that breaks the file is location. The dive radio reports depth while sitting on a dry evidence shelf. The object in evidence is a salt-stained dive radio beside a dry wetsuit and an oxygen gauge that changes between checks. The call carries compressed underwater pressure noise, but the room microphone records dry, fluorescent hum behind it. The gear room is sealed, inland, and too dry to explain the wet footprints stopping in front of the radio. Ask the obvious question: why did nobody notice it the first time? Here is the part that made the Bureau stop treating it like noise. The archive copy includes a dive log entry written after the diver was declared missing. By the second review pass, the Bureau had 3 copies of the same event. One came from the live recorder. One came from a sealed cabinet. One came from a source that should not have been able to transmit anything at all. The call is not leaving the water. The room is replaying the dive until the Bureau gives it a listener. Then, it answers. The case rule is simple. Each replay drains the oxygen gauge by 1 mark. The evidence looks harmless until it isn't. Dust on a table, a light in a window, a needle moving without a hand near it. That restraint is why the case stayed open. Nothing performs for the camera. The room simply changes its mind. So what changed? The final bearing points to the storage room floor, not to the search grid. That is where the story tilts. The sealed inland gear room stops being a location and becomes a test. Every instrument points somewhere plausible. Every human statement points somewhere else. The evidence board splits into 3 columns. The first column is mechanical: serial numbers, room temperature, timestamps, custody marks. The second column is human: what the night staff heard, what they refused to write down, and which light stayed on after the recorder stopped. The third column is the one the Bureau never shows publicly, because it tracks what changed after each replay. On the first replay, a salt-stained dive radio beside a dry wetsuit behaves like damaged equipment. On the second, it behaves like a transmitter. On the third, it behaves like a witness correcting the official record. That progression matters because it turns a strange object into a chain of custody problem. The Bureau isolates the file in a clean room. No network, no wireless card, no external speaker, and a fresh recorder with a blank index. The sound still arrives with the same low pressure under it, but the silence around the sound is different, as if the new room has been added to the recording. And this is where the room stops feeling passive. One analyst marks the moment the case stops being passive evidence. It is not the loudest moment. It is not the most frightening moment. It is a tiny delay before the next tone, a pause just long enough to feel like the file is waiting for the Bureau to catch up. The physical scene around the sealed inland gear room never becomes spectacular. That is what makes it worse. No door slams. No impossible figure crosses the frame. The proof is smaller. A shadow that should belong to equipment that is not there. A meter needle settling before power returns. A tag number printed 1 line too early. The public reconstruction uses only the safest fragments. But even those fragments create a pattern. Every time the Bureau removes context to make the case easier to explain, the remaining evidence becomes more direct. The file seems to punish simplification. By mid-afternoon, the archive team tests a control phrase. They write down a sentence that is never spoken aloud. The next recording does not repeat the sentence. It does something worse. It leaves a gap exactly where the sentence would fit. That gap becomes the case's fingerprint. Not a voice, not a symbol, not a threat. An absence with consistent timing, carried from device to device as if the missing part is the message. The final detail is small. That is why it works. The diver is not calling from underwater. The dry storage room is replaying the dive as if it happened inside it. The Bureau tried to reduce the file to equipment failure, but each cleanroom replay carried one extra detail from the room that had just played it. The public copy removes the worst part. The private copy keeps it. The event behaves less like a transmission and more like a memory deciding which machine should hold it next. The final call reports an oxygen level for someone standing behind the Bureau recorder. The file is sealed as a missing diver radio event with dry land pressure drift marked active. If the dive radio calls again, the Bureau may have to search the room before it searches the water. The next file begins when a vending machine receipt prints one row the cabinet never had.